What did a mountain man really keep close when the trail turned ugly? Most people picture a rifle first, then maybe a big knife, a pistol, or a tomahawk hanging from a rawhide belt. And they are not wrong. But that is only the clean version of the story. The real frontier was rougher, stranger, and far less organized. A man moving through mountain passes, trading posts, river towns, mining camps, and frozen timber did not trust one weapon for every kind of danger. He carried whatever the world had taught him to respect: a belt axe for camp, a rope from the saddle, a quirt from horseback, a walking stick that was not always innocent, a slingshot that old lawmen remembered too well, and blades that modern law would look at very differently. Some of these objects were tools first. Some were weapons from the start. Some lived in the gray space between necessity and trouble. This is not a guide to using them. It is a look at the hard world that made men carry them. Here are 25 outlawed self-defense weapons mountain men carried close. Number 25, the Barlow knife. The Barlow knife was small enough to disappear in a pocket, but old enough to carry the weight of rural America. It was not the kind of blade that made men step back in a saloon. It was plain, folding, practical, and usually worn smooth by years of work. A boy might carry one before he was trusted with a rifle. A farmer might use one before breakfast. A hunter might keep it beside tobacco, string, coins, and a bit of leather that needed trimming. For mountain men and backcountry families, the Barlow was less a weapon than a lesson. It taught a young hand that steel was not for showing off. It was for fixing, cutting, scraping, shaping, and surviving the small problems that came every day. Modern people may look at it and see a simple pocket knife. Old America saw the beginning of self-reliance. Number 24, the belt hook. A belt hook was not sold as a weapon. That is what makes it feel so much older and rougher. It belonged to the world of hides, meat, rope, packs, and camp work. A curved piece of iron that could hang from a belt, a saddle, a shed wall, or the beam of a rough cabin. Trappers, hunters, butchers, and packers understood tools like this because their lives were built around lifting, dragging, hanging, binding, and moving heavy things by hand. On the frontier, iron did not need to be elegant, it only needed to be useful. But usefulness had a darker edge. A tool made for grip, pull, and control could become something else when the camp went bad or a stranger stepped too close after dark. Modern people separate workshop tools from weapons. Old America was not always given that luxury. Some objects became dangerous simply because they were already in a working man's hand. Number 23, the chain whip. A chain whip did not need fine craftsmanship to make people step back. It was rough, cold, and ugly, a length of iron links that belonged more to freight yards, wagon camps, river landings, blacksmith sheds, and mining towns than to any gentleman's weapon case. That was part of its menace. It looked like work until the wrong hands gave it another purpose. Frontier men lived around chains. Chains held loads, dragged timber, secured wagons, tied down freight, and kept heavy things from breaking loose on bad roads. In that world, iron was everywhere, and not all weapons were bought from a gunsmith. Some were simply picked up from the hard edge of labor. A mountain man passing through a rough settlement would have understood that danger did not always come polished, sharpened, or holstered. Sometimes it came rattling. Modern law would not mistake such an object for innocence. Number 22, the railroad spike club. A railroad spike was never meant to ride on a mountain man's belt. But the frontier was full of things that were never meant to become weapons. As rail lines pushed into rough country, iron spikes, broken handles, scrap chains, and heavy tools gathered around work camps, freight yards, bridges, and muddy grade cuts. Men who came down from the mountains into railroad towns found a different kind of danger there, not wolves, snow, or hunger, but crowds of tired laborers, whiskey, gambling, paydays, and bad blood after dark. A spike fixed into a club, or carried as heavy scrap in a desperate hand, belonged to that rough border between tool and threat. It was not elegant, it was not honorable, it was frontier labor turned ugly. Modern eyes would see only a crude weapon. Old railroad camps knew the truth first. Iron did not have to be forged for violence to become dangerous. Number 21, the belt axe. The belt axe was one of the few frontier weapons that earned its place before it ever threatened a man. It was a camp maker, a fire builder, a shelter tool, a small piece of iron that could split kindling, trim poles, clear brush, shape stakes, break ice, and turn a cold patch of timber into something close to livable. For mountain men, hunters, scouts, and packers, it was too useful to leave behind. That usefulness is what made it serious. A belt axe did not need to be hidden. It did not need polish, engraving, or a dramatic name. It hung in plain sight because everyone understood why it was there. In a world of wet wood, frozen hands, and long nights, it answered too many problems to be questioned. Modern life separates tools from weapons. The old frontier did not. The belt axe built the fire before it ever guarded the man beside it. Before we go deeper, remember what kind of world these weapons came from. A mountain man did not live in a place where every object had one clean purpose. A rope was not just a rope, a hook was not just a hook. A piece of iron, a strip of rawhide, a knot of root, or a small axe on the belt could become whatever the moment demanded. That is what modern people often miss. The frontier did not separate tool, weapon, hunting gear, and survival equipment the way we do now. It judged things by a harder standard. Can it help a man eat, travel, repair, escape, warn, or survive one more night? Out there, usefulness came first. Everything else came later. Number 20, the bullwhip. The bullwhip was not the quiet kind of frontier weapon. It announced itself with sound before it ever showed its purpose, a sharp crack across dust, timber, or open yard that could make men and animals turn their heads. It belonged to wagon roads, cattle outfits, pack trains, rough camps, and men who worked around horses, mules, freight, and stubborn distance. For a mountain man, it was not the most common thing to carry. But on the edge of the frontier, where hunters, packers, drovers, and traders crossed paths, a whip could move from tool to warning in a heartbeat. It did not cut like a knife or fire like a pistol. Its power was in reach, noise, and intimidation, the kind of authority that filled a space before anyone stepped closer. Modern people often remember it as performance. Old America knew it could be something harder. Some weapons did not whisper, they cracked. Number 19, the fire-hardened club. The fire-hardened club was older than the frontier itself. It did not come from a factory, a gunsmith, or a polished catalog. It came from wood, heat, patience, and the hard understanding that a man with nothing could still make something dangerous. In the rougher corners of old America, a club like this belonged to camps, cabins, stock pens, and lonely places where iron was scarce, but timber was everywhere. For mountain men and backcountry travelers, it represented the poorest kind of weapon, but poor did not mean useless. A length of hardwood, darkened and hardened near the fire, could sit beside a doorway, ride in a wagon, or lean near a bedroll when the night felt wrong. Modern people often imagine frontier weapons as rifles, revolvers, and famous knives. But before steel became legend, wood had already done the work. Some weapons were not bought. They were made because fear was free. Number 18, the root club. The root club was the kind of weapon a poor man did not need to buy. It came from the crooked places of the forest, a hard knot of root, a heavy bend of wood, a piece of timber shaped by weather before human hands ever touched it. In the backcountry, where iron cost money and stores were far away, a man could still find weight, balance, and threat in the ground beneath his boots. Mountain men, hunters, cabin families, and rough travelers understood that not every weapon came from a blacksmith. Some came from necessity. A root club might lean beside a cabin door, ride in a wagon, or sit near a bedroll when the night outside felt too quiet. It had no polish, no maker's mark, no catalog name. That was the point. Old America did not always need fine steel. Sometimes it only needed hard wood and a reason. Number 17, the slungshot. The slungshot was the kind of weapon that made old lawmen pay attention. It did not look noble. It did not belong in paintings of brave hunters or clean mountain trails. It came from rougher places: ships, river docks, logging camps, railroad edges, mining towns, and the hard corners where working men carried small things that could turn ugly fast. To a mountain man passing through settlement, the slungshot represented a different kind of danger from wolves, weather, or hunger. It was not the wilderness speaking, it was the town after dark. Small, crude, and easy to overlook, it became feared because it blurred the line between pocket object and sudden violence. That is why weapons like it were remembered in old laws and warnings. It had no romance, no frontier glory, just a reputation dark enough to survive after the object itself disappeared. Number 16, the bone club. A bone club came from the kind of world where nothing useful was thrown away. On the old frontier, bone was not just waste. It could become a handle, a tool, a button, a needle, a scraper, or something heavier when a man had little else to trust. In hunting camps and lonely cabins, the remains of an animal could outlive the meal and take on a second purpose. A weapon like this had no polish and no manufacturer's name. It belonged to the poorest edge of survival where steel was expensive, stores were far away, and a man learned to see use in whatever the land left behind. For mountain men, trappers, and backwoods families, that kind of thinking was not strange. It was ordinary. Modern people see a crude object. Old America saw a hard lesson. When the frontier gave a man almost nothing, he learned to make even the bones answer. Before we go deeper, remember what kind of world these weapons came from. A mountain man did not live in a place where every object had one clean purpose. A rope was not just a rope. A hook was not just a hook. A piece of iron, a strip of rawhide, a knot of root, or a small axe on the belt could become whatever the moment demanded. That is what modern people often miss. The frontier did not separate tool, weapon, hunting gear, and survival equipment the way we do now. It judged things by a harder standard. Can it help a man eat, travel, repair, escape, warn, or survive one more night? Out there, usefulness came first. Everything else came later. Number 15. The iron knuckle duster. The iron knuckle duster was not a tool that became a weapon. It was a weapon from the start. It belonged to rough towns, mining camps, freight yards, saloons, and the hard edge of settlement where men crowded together after weeks of hunger, labor, weather, and bad luck. Unlike a belt axe or a root club, it had no honest camp work behind it. Its purpose was written in its shape. That is why lawmen noticed it. For a mountain man coming down from the high country, the knuckle duster represented the danger of civilization after dark. The wilderness could freeze a man, starve him, or break his horse. But town could put him shoulder to shoulder with men who carried trouble in a pocket. Modern law often treats weapons like this seriously. Old frontier towns learned why. It was small enough to hide, but ugly enough to remember. Number 14. The bone-handled shiv. The bone-handled shiv belonged to the lowest, roughest edge of weapon making. It was not a frontier gentleman's blade. It was not a polished hunting knife, not a catalog item, and not something a man displayed with pride. It was the kind of crude weapon remembered from jails, camps, river towns, mining settlements, and desperate places where men made do with scraps, broken steel, bone, antler, or whatever the world left within reach. For a mountain man passing through those places, the shiv represented a darker kind of danger than the wilderness. A wolf did not pretend to be friendly. A storm did not sit beside you in a gambling room. But a man with a crude hidden blade could turn a crowded room dangerous without warning. Modern law would see no innocence in it. Old America understood why. Some weapons were made by craftsmen. Others were made by desperation. Number 13. The rawhide bola. The rawhide bola looked too simple to make modern people nervous. A few hard weights, strips of rawhide, a shape that belonged more to open ground, animals, and old hunting cultures than to the polished weapons behind a store counter. But simplicity was never the same as harmlessness on the frontier. Men who lived around horses, pack animals, hunting camps, and long stretches of open country understood that distance did not always have to be answered with powder and lead. Sometimes a weapon was built around movement, timing, and the old knowledge of how leather, weight, and open space could work together. For mountain men and frontier travelers, the bola was not common like a knife or axe. That is what makes it memorable. It belonged to the strange edge of survival where tools, hunting methods, and weapons often crossed paths. Modern law would look twice at anything made to stop a body in motion. Old America already understood why. Number 12. The antler cudgel. The antler cudgel came from the same hard logic as the bone club. Use what the land gives you. In hunting country, antler was everywhere if a man knew where to look. It could become a handle, a tool, a rack on a cabin wall, or a rough object kept near the door when the night outside felt wrong. It carried the shape of the animal it came from, curved, hard, uneven, and naturally threatening without needing much improvement. For mountain men and backwoods families, antler had a different meaning than it does in a modern lodge. It was not decoration first, it was material. It belonged to a world where hide, bone, horn, wood, sinew, and iron all had second lives. An antler cudgel was not elegant, it was not famous, it did not belong in a military manual. It belonged to the frontier's oldest rule: waste nothing that can still answer fear. Number 11. The scrap iron throwing star. A scrap iron throwing star sounded like something from a campfire rumor, and that was part of its power. It did not belong to the clean world of factory weapons. It belonged to blacksmith corners, railroad scrap piles, mining camps, wagon yards, and the rough imagination of men who had too much iron, too much time, and too many enemies after dark. Unlike a knife, it had no honest place at the supper table. Unlike an axe, it did not build a fire. Its purpose was harder to explain, and that made it the kind of object sheriffs disliked before they even wrote it down. For a mountain man passing through rough settlements, such a thing represented the strange inventions that appeared where law was thin and metal was cheap. Modern eyes would call it crude and illegal. Old frontier towns might have called it something worse. A weapon does not need a long history to leave a bad memory. Number 10. The caltrop. The caltrop was a small weapon with an old and ugly memory. It did not look like much, just a cruel little piece of iron meant for the ground, not the hand. But that is what made it different from the pistols, knives, axes, and clubs men carried openly. A caltrop belonged to fear of pursuit, fear of horses, fear of men coming too close when there was no time left to argue. It was older than the American frontier, but old ideas traveled well. In rough country, where riders, pack animals, wagons, and narrow trails mattered, anything that threatened movement could become serious. A mountain man may not have carried one every day, but frontier memory had room for such objects because the road itself could become part of danger. Modern law would see no innocent purpose in it. It was not made to win a fight. It was made to make pursuit painful. Before we go deeper, remember what kind of world these weapons came from. A mountain man did not live in a place where every object had one clean purpose. A rope was not just a rope. A hook was not just a hook. A piece of iron, a strip of rawhide, a knot of root, or a small axe on the belt could become whatever the moment demanded. That is what modern people often miss. The frontier did not separate tool, weapon, hunting gear, and survival equipment the way we do now. It judged things by a harder standard. Can it help a man eat, travel, repair, escape, warn, or survive one more night? Out there, usefulness came first. Everything else came later. Number 9. The farm flail. The farm flail was born in the barn, not on the battlefield. It belonged to grain, dust, hard hands, and long days of threshing before machines took over the work. But in old America, a tool did not have to travel far to become a weapon. A hinged length of wood, leather, and weight could change its meaning the moment trouble stepped through the barn door. For mountain families, settlers, and backcountry farmers, the flail carried the rough logic of survival. It was already there. It was already familiar. It already had reach, motion, and force built into its shape. That is what made farm tools so important on the frontier. They did not look like outlaw weapons in the morning. They looked like work. But when night came, work could become defense. Modern people separate the barn from the battlefield. Old America knew the distance between them could be one bad evening. Number 8, the nail board. The nail board was not a weapon a man bragged about. It was ugly, desperate, and made from the kind of materials every rough cabin, barn, or wagon shed already had lying around. A piece of wood, old iron. The hard imagination of people who knew a door, a trail, or a dark corner might have to be defended before help arrived. This was not the polished violence of a pistol or the old romance of a Bowie knife. It was frontier fear turned into an object. Poor families, isolated settlers, night watchmen, and rough camp workers understood that not every defense came from a gunsmith or blacksmith. Some came from broken boards and bad nights. Modern law would look at something like this with no patience, especially if used to harm or ambush. But old America had places where fear was practical. The nail board was not noble. It was what desperation looked like when it learned carpentry. Number 7, the rawhide sling. The rawhide sling was one of the oldest answers to distance. It did not need powder, lead, a forged barrel, or a polished blade. It needed leather, cord, weight, and the kind of practice men learned long before weapons had serial numbers or factory names. In the backcountry, where every scrap of hide had value, rawhide could become rope, repair, binding, harness, or something far less innocent. For mountain men and frontier families, a sling belonged to the rough world between hunting tool and weapon. It was light, simple, quiet, and easy to overlook beside louder things like pistols and axes. But old weapons did not survive because they looked impressive. They survived because they answered a problem. Modern people may see it as primitive. Old America knew primitive could still be serious. Before the frontier trusted cartridges and steel, it had already learned what leather and stone could do. Number 6, the Spring Pole Snare Club. The Spring Pole Snare Club belonged to the dark imagination of the backwoods. It was not a clean weapon, and it was not something a man showed with pride. It came from the same world as traplines, bent saplings, rawhide cord, deadfall logs, and lonely winter camps, where men learned that the forest itself could be made to hold force. For mountain men and trappers, the idea was not strange. They lived by reading tension in wood, rope, weather, animal trails, and silence. A tool that stored force and released it later belonged to the harsher side of that knowledge. But that is exactly why modern eyes would treat it with suspicion. Anything that waits unseen crosses a line between defense and danger. Old America had room for desperate inventions. But even then, some objects belonged more to fear than honor. This was not just a weapon. It was a warning built from the woods. Number 5, the cane sword. The cane sword was dangerous because it borrowed the face of respectability. From the outside, it looked like a walking cane, the kind of object a traveler, merchant, older gentleman, or well-dressed stranger might carry through a hotel lobby, train platform, courthouse step, or muddy town street. But hidden inside that ordinary shape was a different purpose, one that made lawmakers and sheriffs look twice. For mountain men and frontier travelers, the cane sword belonged less to the deep timber and more to the dangerous places between journeys, river towns, gambling rooms, boarding houses. Streets where a visible pistol drew attention, but a walking stick passed without question. That disguise was the whole story. It was not frightening because it looked brutal. It was frightening because it did not look like a weapon until the truth came out. Old America understood one hard lesson. Sometimes danger dressed like a gentleman. Number 4, the War Club. The War Club was older than the frontier towns that later tried to name and control every weapon. It did not need a barrel, a trigger, or a blade to be feared. Its power came from weight, balance, hardwood, stone, bone, or iron, whatever a hard country could offer to men who understood close danger. Across old America, Clubs of different forms appeared in hunting grounds, borderlands, camps, and conflicts long before factory weapons became common. For mountain men, traders, and travelers moving through contested country, the war club carried a meaning deeper than simple violence. It was a reminder that the land already had its own weapon traditions before newcomers arrived with rifles and steel. Modern people may call it primitive, but primitive only means it came from an older knowledge. The war club did not need to look modern to be serious. It came from a world where the hand, the land, and fear met in one object. Number 3. The Jawbone Club. The Jawbone Club looked like something pulled from a nightmare and a butcher's floor at the same time. It was not forged, polished, or sold from a catalog. It came from the remains of an animal hard bone, natural weight, rough edges, and the old frontier habit of wasting nothing that could still serve a purpose. In a world where stores were far away and metal cost money, even bone could become more than memory. For mountain men, hunters, and backwoods families, the idea was not as strange as it sounds today. They lived close to death: meat, hides, antlers, sinew, and skulls. The animal did not end at supper. Its body became tools, handles, ornaments, warnings, and sometimes something darker. Modern people would see horror in it. Old America would have seen necessity first. The Jawbone Club was not elegant. It was survival with the animal still showing. Number 2. The Duckfoot Pistol. The Duckfoot pistol looked like a weapon designed by fear instead of elegance. Its barrel spread outward like a crude iron fan, giving it a strange shape that made people remember it long after cleaner firearms replaced it. It was not the mountain man's everyday companion, and it was not a hunter's tool. It belonged more to travelers, guards, ship captains, and men who feared being surrounded in close quarters. That is what makes it so unsettling. A normal pistol answered one direction. The Duckfoot pistol seemed built for a room, a crowd, a doorway, or a moment when danger came from more than one place at once. On the frontier, where river towns, trading posts, and rough settlements could turn ugly fast, that idea had a dark appeal. Modern eyes would see it as bizarre and excessive. Old America understood the fear behind it. Some weapons were made for aim. This one was made for panic. Number 1. The cane gun. The cane gun may be the most unsettling weapon on this list because it did not look like a weapon at all. It borrowed the shape of something ordinary: a walking cane, a traveler's support, a gentleman's object, the kind of thing a man could carry through a train platform, hotel porch, courthouse step, or muddy frontier street without causing alarm. But hidden inside that respectable shape was a firearm, and that changed everything. For mountain men and frontier travelers, the cane gun belonged less to the open wilderness and more to the dangerous places between journeys: trading towns, river landings, boarding houses, roads where a man wanted protection without announcing it to every stranger watching from the doorway. That disguise is what made it so feared. A pistol warned the room. A rifle announced itself from across the trail. But a cane gun kept it secret until the secret was already too late. Modern law would see it clearly. Old America feared it because it did not want to be seen. These weapons were not born in a clean world. They came from muddy trails, winter cabins, mining camps, river towns, trading posts, railroad edges, and lonely roads where help was not close enough to matter. Some were tools twisted by fear. Some were crude things shaped from bone, antler, root, iron, rawhide, and scrap. Some were hidden so well that their danger came from looking ordinary. That is what makes them worth remembering. They were not just weapons. They were evidence of a harder America, a place where men carried their answers by hand, where law arrived late, and where survival sometimes looked rough, ugly, and improvised. Modern life changed the rules, and for good reason. Many of these objects belong only in history now, but history still has something to teach. Which weapon on this list surprised you the most? And what should we cover next? Outlaw cowboy weapons, forgotten trapper tools, or weapons old sheriffs feared most?